Some secrets are so dangerous that people would rather watch them turn to ash than let the truth see daylight. Wyoming Territory, 1878. A woman stumbles upon an abandoned ranch at dusk, desperate, alone, with nowhere left to run. In her trembling hands, she clutches charred fragments of a letter, words that someone tried desperately to destroy. "They'll kill me if they know I have this. They already killed him." What she discovered in those burnt pages would expose a conspiracy that reached from corrupt railroad barons to territorial judges. A truth so explosive that powerful men had already spilled blood to keep it buried. But when Nathaniel Cross, the black rancher who'd fought his own battles against those who said he didn't belong, found her hiding in that forgotten homestead, he made a choice that would put both their lives on the line. Read it, every word. Because once you know the truth, you can never unknow it. Stay with me until the final chapter, because what that letter revealed didn't just change 2 lives, it brought down an empire built on lies, theft, and murder. And the price of justice, higher than either of them could have imagined. Before we ride deeper into this powerful story, I need you to understand something important. Here at the Black Rancher, we're not just telling tales, we're excavating the buried truths of America's frontier. These are the stories they erased from history books because they challenge the narrative of who really built this nation. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell right now. Why? Because this channel is your gateway to forgotten heroes, hidden courage, and the kind of truth that changes everything you thought you knew about the Old West. If you believe history belongs to everyone, not just those who wrote it, then share this video. Help us restore these voices that were deliberately silenced. Welcome to The Black Rancher. Now, let's discover what was in that letter. Wyoming Territory, September 1878. The setting sun painted the Wyoming sky in shades of crimson and gold as Nathaniel Cross guided his buckskin mare, Lady, along the narrow trail toward what locals called the Holloway Place. At 38, Nathaniel's face bore the marks of a hard life, scars from slave chains, lines from years under the brutal sun, and eyes that had seen both the worst and occasionally the best of what humanity could offer. The Holloway homestead had been abandoned for 3 months now, ever since Thomas Holloway's body was found at the bottom of Black Canyon Gorge. Official verdict: accidental fall while surveying. Nathaniel had his doubts, but doubts didn't mean much in a territory where justice wore the face of whoever had the most money and guns. He'd ridden out today to check on the cattle he'd been grazing on the vacant land, an arrangement he'd made with Holloway before the man's convenient accident. The Crossed Arrow Ranch, Nathaniel's spread of 800 acres carved from land everyone said was too rocky and worthless to bother with, had prospered over the last 12 years, precisely because Nathaniel knew what hard work and smart deals could accomplish. But as Nathaniel approached the weathered cabin, something felt wrong. Smoke. Not the thick black smoke of a house fire, but the thin gray wisps of a small, controlled burn. Someone was inside. Nathaniel's hand moved instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip as he dismounted, tying Lady to a fence post that leaned at a precarious angle. The front door hung ajar, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. "Hello in the house," he called, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd learned to command respect in a world determined to deny it to him. "This is Nathaniel Cross, property owner checking on adjacent land. Show yourself." Silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of someone moving inside. Quick, panicked footsteps, something falling. Nathaniel drew his weapon and approached cautiously. Through the broken window, he could see a figure moving in the dim interior. Smaller, clearly feminine, frantically trying to extinguish something in the fireplace. "Ma'am, I'm coming in. Don't be alarmed." He pushed the door open slowly, letting the fading daylight spill into the dusty interior of the cabin. The woman inside froze, her back to him, hands still hovering over the fireplace where embers glowed faintly. She was dressed in a travel cloak that had seen better days, her dark brown hair escaping from a once neat bun. Even from behind, Nathaniel could see the trembling in her shoulders, the rigid tension of someone pushed beyond their limits. "Turn around slowly," Nathaniel said, keeping his gun lowered but ready. "I'm not here to hurt you, but I need to see your face." The woman turned, and Nathaniel found himself looking at a face that mixed fear with a stubborn defiance that reminded him of a cornered wildcat. She was perhaps 30, with sharp green eyes that assessed him quickly, taking in his dark skin, the quality of his clothes, the confident way he held himself. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please don't tell them you found me here." "Who's them?" Nathaniel asked, holstering his gun in a deliberate show of peace. The woman's eyes darted to the fireplace, where charred fragments of paper lay among the ashes. "The men who killed my brother. The men who will kill me too if they know I have—" She stopped, biting her lip. Nathaniel's gaze followed hers to the fireplace. Among the ashes he could see what looked like partially burned papers, and clutched in her hand, held against her chest like a lifeline, was a crumpled envelope with more papers inside. "You're trying to burn evidence," Nathaniel said, piecing it together. "I was trying to," she admitted, her voice breaking. "But I can't. God help me, I can't destroy it. It's the only proof of what they did, of why Thomas is dead." Her voice caught, and Nathaniel saw tears streaming down her dirt-smudged cheeks. "Thomas Holloway?" Nathaniel asked, his interest sharpening. "You're his sister?" She nodded, swaying slightly on her feet. Now that Nathaniel looked closer, he could see she was on the edge of collapse. Exhausted, probably hadn't eaten properly in days. "Sit down before you fall down," he said, his tone gentling. "Whatever's happening here, passing out won't help matters." She hesitated, clearly torn between fleeing and staying, but exhaustion won. She sank onto the old wooden chair by the table, still clutching the envelope. Nathaniel moved to the kitchen area, finding a dusty tin cup and filling it from his canteen. He handed it to her. "Drink. Then you're going to tell me what's in that letter you're so afraid of." She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. When she finished, she looked at him with those fierce green eyes. "Why should I trust you? I don't know you." "Because," Nathaniel said, pulling up another chair and sitting across from her, "I'm probably the only person in 50 miles who has as much reason to hate the territorial authorities as you seem to, and because I don't believe your brother's death was an accident any more than you do." The woman studied him for a long moment, and Nathaniel could see her mind working, calculating risks. Finally, she spoke. "My name is Margaret Holloway. My brother Thomas discovered something that connects the Wyoming Central Railroad, Judge Harrison Blackwell, and at least 3 territorial land commissioners to a scheme that's stolen thousands of acres from legitimate homesteaders over the past 5 years. Nathaniel felt a cold weight settling in his gut. Those were dangerous names, powerful names. "And you have proof?" he asked quietly. Margaret's hand tightened on the envelope. "Thomas spent 2 years documenting everything. False surveys, forged deeds, intimidation, bribery. He wrote it all down, kept copies of documents. This letter," she held up the envelope, "this was his insurance policy. He sent it to me in Denver 3 weeks ago with instructions to take it to the federal marshal if anything happened to him." "And something happened," Nathaniel finished. "They pushed him off Black Canyon Gorge," Margaret said, her voice hollow, "made it look like an accident. I got word from a friend in Cheyenne who works as a telegrapher. She saw messages between Judge Blackwell and someone called the Contractor, discussing the Holloway problem being resolved." "And now you're the problem," Nathaniel said. "They don't know I exist," Margaret said quickly. "Thomas never told anyone about me. We'd been estranged for years after our father's death, disagreement over the inheritance. But when he sent me this letter, he knew they were closing in." Nathaniel leaned back, processing. This was bigger than he'd expected, more dangerous. Getting involved would paint a target on his back the size of Wyoming territory. But then again, Nathaniel Cross had never been good at walking away from fights that mattered. "You were trying to burn that letter," he said. "Why? If it's your only proof—" "Because I'm scared," Margaret burst out. "Because I watched my brother die for this information, and I don't want to die too. Because even if I take it to the federal marshal, who's to say he isn't bought too? These people have tentacles everywhere." "So your plan was to destroy the evidence and— what? Hope they forgot about you?" "My plan was to disappear," Margaret said desperately. Change my name? Go to California. Start over. But I can't do it. I can't let Thomas's death mean nothing. I can't let them win. Nathaniel stood, walking to the fireplace. He crouched down, examining the partially burned papers among the ashes. Even damaged, he could make out names, dates, survey numbers. This was real. This was damning. He turned back to Margaret, who watched him with a mixture of hope and terror. "Read it," he said quietly. "What?" "The letter. Read it to me, every word. Because once you do, once you speak that truth out loud to another person, you can't take it back. And maybe that's what you need, someone else to know, to carry this burden with you." Margaret stared at him. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Getting involved in this could cost you everything." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, memories flooding back. Memories of fighting for land the county tried to seize on false pretenses. Memories of courtrooms where his word meant nothing against white testimony. Memories of building something from nothing while others tried to tear it down at every turn. "I know what it's like," he said simply, "to fight powerful men who think they can take whatever they want just because they have the law in their pocket. And I know what it's like to need someone to believe you when everyone else calls you a liar." He met her eyes steadily. "So read it, Miss Holloway. Read every word, and then we'll figure out what to do next, together." Margaret's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. The letter inside was multiple pages, covered in Thomas Holloway's neat handwriting. She took a shaky breath and began to read, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Margaret, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true." As the sun set completely outside, casting the cabin into shadow, Margaret Holloway read her brother's final testament, a detailed account of corruption, theft, and murder that reached into the highest levels of territorial power. And Nathaniel Cross listened, knowing that once these words were spoken, once this truth was shared, there would be no going back for either of them. The letter would change everything. The only question was whether they'd survive long enough to see justice done. Margaret's voice cracked as she read the final lines of her brother's letter. The cabin had grown dark around them, illuminated only by the lamp Nathaniel had lit halfway through her reading. The words hung heavy in the air, undeniable and damning. Nathaniel sat in silence for a moment after she finished, processing the magnitude of what he'd just heard. Thomas Holloway had been thorough, methodical in documenting a conspiracy that stretched across 5 years, involving falsified land surveys, forged deeds, intimidation of witnesses, and at least 2 murders beyond his own. "The Diamond Creek incident," Nathaniel said finally. "I remember that. They said those homesteaders abandoned their claim due to drought." "They were burned out," Margaret said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "Thomas documented it. He interviewed neighbors who saw railroad enforcers torch their cabin in the middle of the night. The family barely escaped with their lives. And Judge Blackwell ruled their claim invalid due to abandonment," Nathaniel continued, pieces falling into place. "Letting the railroad buy the land for pennies." Margaret nodded. "That's just one instance. Thomas documented 17 similar cases, 17 families destroyed so that railroad could extend their line without paying fair market value." Nathaniel stood, pacing the small cabin. His mind raced through implications, dangers, possibilities. "This contractor your brother mentioned, the one communicating with Judge Blackwell, do you know who it is?" "Thomas suspected Marcus Thornton," Margaret said. "He runs the Wyoming Development Company. On paper, it's a legitimate land speculation business. In reality, it's the mechanism they use to acquire all these properties." Nathaniel knew that name too. Thornton had tried to buy the Crossed Arrow Ranch 2 years ago, offering far below market value. When Nathaniel refused, there'd been incidents, cut fences, poisoned cattle, fires, nothing he could prove, but enough to make the message clear. "We need to get you out of here," Nathaniel said. "If they're looking for you—" "They're not," Margaret interrupted. "Not yet. I took precautions. I traveled under an assumed name, paid cash for everything, told no one I was coming here. As far as anyone in Denver knows, Margaret Holloway is visiting friends in Santa Fe. But you came straight to your brother's homestead. I needed to understand what happened, and I thought—" She gestured helplessly at the letter. I thought maybe I could find the courage to do something with this information if I stood where he last stood. Nathaniel moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. His ranch was only 3 miles west, close enough to watch this place, close enough to notice if trouble came calling. "My ranch," he said. "It's secure, private. You can stay there while we figure out next steps." Margaret shook her head immediately. "I can't put you in danger." "Too late," Nathaniel said with a wry smile. "You already did when you read me that letter. Now I'm involved whether you like it or not." "Why?" Margaret asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you risk everything for a stranger?" Nathaniel turned from the window, and in the lamplight Margaret could see the steel in his expression. "Because 12 years ago, I almost lost my land to men just like the ones your brother fought. Different names, same game. They thought a black man owning prime grazing land was an insult to their vision of Wyoming territory." He walked to the table, placing his hands flat on its surface. "A lawyer from Denver helped me. White man named Samuel Garrett. He didn't have to. He knew it would cost him clients, social standing, but he looked at my deed, saw it was legitimate, and decided that the law meant something." "What happened to him?" Margaret asked quietly. "He's still practicing law in Denver," Nathaniel said. "Still taking cases that matter rather than cases that pay, and every year I send him a portion of my profits as thanks." He met Margaret's eyes. "Your brother was like him. He stood for something when standing was dangerous. I won't let that mean nothing." Margaret wiped tears from her cheeks. "You don't understand how powerful these men are. Judge Blackwell controls every courtroom in the territory. Thornton has the railroad money behind him. Even if we take this letter to authorities, who would believe us?" "Federal authorities," Nathaniel said. "Your brother was smart. This isn't just a territorial matter anymore. Railroad fraud, falsified federal land claims, postal fraud from those forged documents. This falls under federal jurisdiction." "The nearest federal marshal is in Cheyenne," Margaret pointed out, 150 miles away. We'd never make it." Nathaniel considered this. She was right. Traveling that distance with evidence this explosive would be suicide. They needed a different approach. "Then we bring the marshal here," he said. "How?" "Telegraph," Nathaniel said. "But not from Clearwater. Too risky. There's a relay station in Copper Ridge, 30 miles south. Small operation run by a retired Army sergeant named Walsh. He owes me a favor." "What kind of favor?" Margaret asked. "The kind where I didn't mention to authorities that I found his daughter when she ran away from an arranged marriage 3 years ago," Nathaniel said. "Gave her safe passage to Omaha and money to start fresh. Walsh knows how to keep his mouth shut, and he'll let us use his telegraph without asking questions." Margaret looked down at the letter in her hands. "And what do we say? Please come investigate corruption that involves people who probably have you in their pocket too." "We say," Nathaniel said carefully, "that we have documented evidence of a conspiracy involving railroad land fraud, federal land office corruption, and multiple murders, and we hint that we have proof linking it to territorial officials whose corruption extends beyond Wyoming. Will that be enough?" "It'll be enough to get a federal investigator here," Nathaniel said. "What happens after depends on the quality of your brother's documentation and whether we can survive long enough to hand it over." A sound outside froze them both. Hoofbeats, multiple riders, approaching fast. Nathaniel moved instantly, extinguishing the lamp and pulling Margaret away from the window. In the sudden darkness, they could hear the riders slowing, circling the cabin. "Someone's been here," a rough voice called out. "There's smoke from the chimney, still warm." "Check inside," another voice ordered. This one was cultured, educated. "If that Holloway woman found anything, I want it burned before dawn." Margaret's hand found Nathaniel's arm, gripping tight. He could feel her trembling, but to her credit, she made no sound. The cabin door burst open, lantern light spilling inside. 3 men entered, 2 hired guns by the look of them, and 1 well-dressed man in a suit that probably cost more than most families made in a year. The well-dressed man surveyed the cabin, his gaze lingering on the fireplace with its telltale ashes. "Someone tried to burn papers here. Recent." "Could have been drifters, Mr. Thornton," one of the gunmen suggested. So this was Marcus Thornton himself, Nathaniel thought, the contractor. Search the place, Thornton ordered. Check for anything Holloway might have hidden, and if you find signs of recent occupation, I want to know where they went. The gunmen moved through the cabin, and Nathaniel held his breath as one passed within inches of their hiding spot, behind the heavy wardrobe. Margaret's fingers dug into his arm, her face pressed against his shoulder to muffle any sound. After what felt like an eternity, the gunmen returned to Thornton. Nothing, boss. Place is clean except for those ashes. Thornton stood at the fireplace, using a poker to stir through the remains. Whoever was here tried to burn documents. The question is whether they succeeded. He straightened, brushing ash from his expensive gloves. Double the patrols on all roads leading out of Clearwater. If the Holloway woman is in this territory, I want to know about it. And remember, Judge Blackwell wants this situation resolved quietly. No witnesses, no evidence, no problems. Understood? Yes, sir, the gunman chorused. Good. Let's go. I have a meeting with the railroad executives in Cheyenne tomorrow, and I'd prefer to assure them that our little complication has been handled. The three men left, their horses' hoofbeats fading into the distance. Nathaniel and Margaret remained frozen behind the wardrobe for long minutes after silence fell, neither willing to believe they were safe. Finally, Nathaniel eased away from the hiding spot, checking through the window to ensure the riders were truly gone. "We need to move now," he whispered. "They'll be back at first light, probably with more men." Margaret nodded, still clutching the letter. "Your ranch, is it far?" 3 miles through rough country, Nathaniel said. "We'll have to lead my horse, travel quiet. Can you manage it?" "I'll manage," Margaret said, her voice steadier now. "I've come too far to give up now." Nathaniel gathered what few supplies remained in the cabin, a blanket, a canteen, some jerky he'd brought in his saddlebag. Margaret tucked the precious letter inside her cloak, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. They slipped out of the cabin like shadows, Nathaniel leading Lady by her reins to avoid the noise of hoofbeats. The Wyoming night was dark, clouds obscuring the moon, which worked in their favor, but it also made travel treacherous over rocky terrain. As they climbed into the hills, Margaret stumbled on loose stones. Nathaniel caught her arm, steadying her. "Are you all right?" "Just tired," she said. "I haven't slept properly in 3 days." "We'll rest once we reach the ranch," Nathaniel promised. "It's defensible, well supplied. You'll be safe there while we plan our next move." They traveled in silence for another hour, climbing higher into the hills. Below them, Nathaniel could see the distant lights of Clearwater, where comfortable people slept, unaware of the corruption poisoning their territory from within. Finally, as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them both, Nathaniel pointed ahead to where lantern light glowed in the distance. There, the Crossed Arrow Ranch, home. The ranch house came into view, a solid structure of log and stone, built to last and built to defend if necessary. Smoke rose from the chimney, meaning his foreman Jacob was still awake. As they approached, the front door opened and a tall, lean black man stepped out, rifle in hand. His weathered face split into a grin when he recognized Nathaniel. "Boss, we were starting to worry," Jacob called. "You're 3 hours late." "Had complications," Nathaniel said, helping Margaret up the porch steps. "Jacob, this is Miss Margaret Holloway. She'll be staying with us for a while." Jacob's keen eyes took in Margaret's exhausted state, the way she clutched her cloak protectively, the tension in Nathaniel's shoulders. He was smart enough not to ask questions yet. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "welcome to the Crossed Arrow. We'll get you settled in the guest room, get some food in you." Inside, the ranch house was warm and comfortable, a testament to Nathaniel's 12 years of hard work. Margaret found herself in a clean guest room with a real bed, fresh water, and the first sense of safety she'd felt in days. Nathaniel left her to rest while he briefed Jacob on the situation. His foreman's expression grew grimmer with each word. "You're playing with fire, boss," Jacob said when Nathaniel finished. "These aren't small-time crooks. This is railroad money, territorial judges, organized corruption." "I know," Nathaniel said, "but I've seen too many good people crushed by powerful men who think the law doesn't apply to them. Thomas Holloway died trying to do the right thing. I won't let that be for nothing." Jacob sighed, but there was approval in his eyes. "What do you need from me?" Watch the approaches to the ranch. If anyone comes asking about strangers or seems suspicious, I want to know immediately. And send a rider to Copper Ridge, first light. Tell Walsh I need to use his telegraph. Urgent business. Consider it done, Jacob said. He paused. Boss, you know this could end badly. It could, Nathaniel agreed, but it could also end with justice being done. That's worth the risk. As Jacob left to organize the watch rotation, Nathaniel stood at his window, looking out over the land he'd fought so hard to claim and keep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But for tonight, a woman who'd carried an impossible burden alone now had an ally. And sometimes, Nathaniel thought, that made all the difference. In the guest room, Margaret finally allowed herself to sleep, the letter tucked safely beneath her pillow. In her dreams, her brother's voice whispered encouragement. You're not alone anymore, Maggie. Finish what I started. And in the morning, that's exactly what they would do. If this story is gripping you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button right now and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. At The Black Rancher, we're committed to uncovering the hidden histories that shaped America, the stories of courage and justice that powerful people tried to erase. Your subscription helps us continue this important work. Every share, every like, every comment helps these forgotten voices reach more people who need to know that standing up for what's right has always mattered, even when the cost was everything. Subscribe now, ring that bell. Let's make sure these stories are never forgotten again. Now let's return to Wyoming, where Nathaniel and Margaret are about to discover just how deep the conspiracy goes. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Wyoming hills. Nathaniel stood on his porch, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the horizon with the practiced vigilance of a man who'd learned that complacency could be fatal. Jacob approached from the barn, leading a saddled horse. Young Billy's ready to ride to Copper Ridge. Gave him your message for Walsh. Good, Nathaniel said. Tell him to be careful. Stay off main roads. Don't talk to strangers. Already did, Jacob assured him. That boy's got sense beyond his years. They watched as Billy, one of the ranch's younger hands, rode out at a steady pace toward the southern hills. The telegraph message to the federal marshal might be their only hope of bringing legitimate authority to bear on this situation. Inside the house, Margaret emerged from the guest room, looking slightly less exhausted after a night's sleep. Nathaniel had left clean clothes for her, practical ranch wear that would serve better than her travel dress if they needed to move quickly. Coffee? He offered, pouring her a cup without waiting for an answer. She accepted it gratefully. Thank you. For everything. I still can't quite believe you're doing this. Believe it, Nathaniel said. Now, we need to talk strategy. You said your brother documented 17 cases of fraud. Are those documents with that letter? Margaret shook her head. Thomas was too smart for that. The letter summarizes everything, provides an overview, but the actual evidence, deeds, surveys, witness statements, correspondence, he hid separately. Nathaniel set down his coffee. Where? I don't know, Margaret admitted. The letter says where the Iron Horse drinks, that's all. It was Thomas's way of protecting the information. If someone forced the letter's location from him, they still wouldn't have the actual evidence. Shows where the Iron Horse drinks, Nathaniel repeated, thinking. Railroad terminology. Water tower, coal station? I thought that too, Margaret said. But which one? There are dozens along the Wyoming Central line. Jacob, who'd been listening from the doorway, spoke up. Begging pardon, miss, but did your brother have any particular connection to a specific station? Margaret thought for a moment. He did surveys for the railroad before he started investigating them. He would have visited multiple stations. Recent visits? Nathaniel asked. Someplace he'd have access to hide documents. Margaret's eyes widened. Black Rock Station. He mentioned it in his last real letter to me, the one before this confession. He said he'd been hired to survey a water rights dispute near there. That was 6 weeks before he died. Black Rock is 40 miles east, Jacob said. Small station, mostly freight. Not much traffic. A perfect place to hide something, Nathaniel agreed, if we're right about this. That's a big if, Margaret cautioned. And even if we find the documents, How do we get them to federal authorities without being killed in the process? Before Nathaniel could answer, a shout came from the watchtower Jacob had established on the high ridge. One of the ranch hands was signaling, riders approaching. Nathaniel moved to the window, his hand instinctively going to his gun. Through his field glasses, he could see 3 men on horseback, riding openly along the main trail to his ranch, not trying to hide their approach. "I know one of them," Jacob said, peering over Nathaniel's shoulder. "That's Sheriff Dawson from Clearwater." "And the others?" Nathaniel asked. "Don't recognize them. Could be deputies." Margaret had gone pale. "They're looking for me." "Maybe," Nathaniel said. "Or maybe this is something else entirely. Either way, stay in the guest room. If I need you to run, Jacob will get you to the back trail." "Nathaniel, trust me," he said firmly. "I've dealt with unwelcome visits before." Margaret retreated to the guest room, while Nathaniel composed himself and walked out to the porch. He'd learned long ago that showing fear only encouraged predators. Sheriff Dawson rode up with his companions, dismounting with a friendly enough expression. But Nathaniel didn't miss how the other 2 men, harder, meaner looking, kept their hands near their weapons. "Morning, Cross," Dawson said. "Hope we're not interrupting anything." "Just morning chores, Sheriff," Nathaniel replied evenly. "What brings you out this way?" "Looking for a woman," Dawson said, pulling out a description sheet. "Margaret Holloway, late 20s, dark hair, green eyes. She's wanted for questioning regarding her brother's death." "Wanted for questioning?" Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "I thought Thomas Holloway's death was ruled accidental." "It was," one of the hard-looking men interjected, "but there's been some irregularities in his estate settlement. Sister's the only living heir, and she seems to have disappeared." "This is Mr. Crawford," Dawson said, gesturing to the speaker. "He's representing the Territorial Land Office, and this is Mr. Burke from the Wyoming Development Company." So Thornton had sent his men directly to the sheriff. Nathaniel felt a cold anger settle in his gut. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Nathaniel said calmly. "But even if I had, what would the Territorial Land Office and a development company want with a grieving sister?" "Just routine estate matters," Crawford said smoothly. "Nothing to concern yourself with." "Then why bring the sheriff?" Nathaniel asked. "Because Miss Holloway left Denver without telling anyone where she was going," Burke explained. "Her friends are worried. We're just trying to help locate her, make sure she's safe." "How considerate," Nathaniel said, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "I'll keep an eye out. If I see her, I'll be sure to let Sheriff Dawson know." Crawford's eyes narrowed. "You seem mighty suspicious for someone who claims he hasn't seen her." "I'm suspicious of men who show up at my ranch asking questions," Nathaniel replied. "Call it habit from dealing with people who think a black man owning land is an offense against nature." Dawson shifted uncomfortably. He knew Nathaniel's history, knew the ranch owner had legal standing to be on this land. "Now, Cross, no need to make this personal." "Isn't it personal?" Nathaniel asked. 3 men ride onto my property, essentially accusing me of harboring a fugitive." "No one's accusing you of anything," Dawson said quickly. "Yet," Burke added, his tone making it a threat. Nathaniel met the man's gaze steadily. "I believe you gentlemen have finished your business here, unless you have a warrant to search my property." "We don't need a warrant to ask questions," Crawford said. "No," Nathaniel agreed, "but you need one to search. And since I've answered your questions, I'd appreciate if you'd move along. I have a ranch to run." For a moment, tension hung thick in the air. Burke's hand moved closer to his gun, and Nathaniel saw Jacob shift position at the barn door, rifle now visible. Sheriff Dawson saw it too and made a decision. "All right, Cross, we'll be on our way, but if you do see Miss Holloway, you'll be the first to know," Nathaniel lied smoothly. The 3 men remounted and rode out, but Nathaniel noticed they went east instead of back toward Clearwater, toward Black Rock Station. Jacob came to stand beside him. "They know something. They know she's in the territory," Nathaniel said, "and they're smart enough to figure she might be looking for whatever her brother hid. We need to get to Black Rock before they do." "That's suicide," Jacob said flatly. "They'll be watching that station like hawks now." "Then we go tonight," Nathaniel said, "under cover of darkness." "We?" Margaret's voice came from behind them. She'd been listening at the door. You're not leaving me behind. Miss Holloway, Margaret, she corrected, and I'm coming. Those are my brother's documents. I'm the only one who knows exactly what to look for. Nathaniel wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her eyes. This woman had come too far, risked too much to be left behind now. Fine, he said. But we do this my way. We leave at sunset, travel by back trails. Jacob, I need you to hold the ranch. If we don't return by dawn, take the remaining evidence and get it to Samuel Garrett in Denver. Boss? That's an order, Nathaniel said firmly. This is bigger than any of us. The evidence has to survive even if we don't. The day passed with agonizing slowness as they prepared. Nathaniel checked weapons, assembled supplies, studied maps of the area around Black Rock Station. Margaret packed the letter carefully in waterproof wrapping, then helped prepare travel rations. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Nathaniel and Margaret prepared to depart. Jacob had saddled two of the ranch's best horses, steady animals that could navigate rough terrain in darkness. You watch yourself, boss, Jacob said, gripping Nathaniel's hand firmly. And Miss Margaret, your brother would be proud of what you're doing. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. Thank you for everything. They rode out as the last light faded from the sky, following trails that Nathaniel knew by heart. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead, providing just enough light to navigate by. For hours they traveled in silence, both lost in their thoughts. Margaret thought of Thomas, of the last time she'd seen him 5 years ago at their father's funeral, of the harsh words they'd exchanged. She'd give anything for a chance to take them back, to tell him she understood now what had driven him. Nathaniel thought about what they were riding into: armed men, powerful interests, the very real possibility that neither of them would see another sunrise. But he also thought about his own journey from slavery to freedom, to prosperity, about how many people had risked themselves to help him along the way. It was time to pay that forward. Around midnight, they reached the ridge overlooking Black Rock Station. Below them, the small station house sat dark and quiet. The water tower loomed beside it, a massive structure that fed the steam engines that kept the railroad running. There, Margaret whispered, pointing, where the Iron Horse drinks. But they weren't alone. Through his field glasses, Nathaniel could see the glow of cigarettes near the station house, guards waiting in the darkness. Thornton's men had beat them there. We need a different approach, Nathaniel said quietly. Can't go in direct, they're expecting that. Margaret studied the layout. The water tower. Could we approach from the east? There's cover from those rocks. Maybe, Nathaniel considered, if we leave the horses here and go on foot. Then that's what we do, Margaret said, already dismounting. They secured the horses in a sheltered ravine where they wouldn't be spotted, then began the careful descent toward the station. Every step had to be placed with precision. One stumble, one loose rock, and they'd alert the guards below. It took nearly an hour to reach the base of the water tower. Up close, the structure was even more massive, its wooden legs thick as tree trunks, its tank holding thousands of gallons. Your brother would have needed someplace accessible but hidden, Nathaniel whispered, someplace he could reach without drawing attention. Margaret circled the tower's base, examining each support beam. Then she froze, her hand pressing against one of the beams. Here, there's a hollow space. Nathaniel moved to her side. Sure enough, someone had carefully removed a section of the beam and created a hidden compartment, then replaced the wood so cleverly that it was nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. Margaret's fingers found the edge and pulled. The wood panel came away, revealing a wrapped bundle stuffed deep into the hollow space. Thomas, she breathed, tears streaming down her face as she recognized her brother's handwriting on the bundle's wrapping. We need to move, Nathaniel urged, hearing voices from the station house. The guards were making their rounds. Margaret pulled the bundle free and tucked it under her cloak. They'd just replaced the panel when a shout rang out. There, by the tower! Lantern lights speared through the darkness as men rushed from the station house. Nathaniel grabbed Margaret's hand and ran, abandoning stealth for speed. Gunshots cracked behind them, bullets whining off rocks. They scrambled up the slope toward where they'd left the horses, lungs burning, legs screaming with effort. A bullet struck the rock beside Nathaniel's head. showering him with stone fragments. Another tugged at Margaret's cloak but missed flesh. They reached the horses, mounted in desperate haste, and spurred them into motion. Behind them, their pursuers were mounting up as well, determined not to let them escape with the evidence. The night chase that followed was desperate and terrifying. Nathaniel led them through every difficult trail he knew, using his knowledge of the terrain to gain precious seconds. But their pursuers were skilled riders, and they were closing the gap. "The canyon!" Margaret shouted over the thunder of hoofbeats. "Can we lose them there?" "Too dangerous in the dark," Nathaniel called back. "One wrong turn and we're trapped." But they had few options left. Nathaniel made a split-second decision, veering towards Stone Creek Canyon, a maze of narrow passages and dead ends that could be either their salvation or their tomb. They plunged into the canyon's mouth, walls rising dark on either side. Behind them, their pursuers' lanterns bobbed like angry fireflies. Nathaniel guided them through turns he barely remembered, praying his memory was accurate, left at the split rock, right where the creek bed ran dry, straight through the narrow gap that scraped their legs against stone. Finally, they emerged on the far side of the canyon, the distant lights of the Crossed Arrow Ranch visible in the valley below. But their pursuers were still coming, emerging from the canyon mouth with murder in their eyes. "Ride!" Nathaniel shouted, and they gave their horses their heads, racing across open ground with everything the animals had left. They were still a quarter-mile from the ranch when gunfire erupted from ahead, but not aimed at them. Jacob and the ranch hands had set up a defensive position, providing covering fire that forced their pursuers to seek cover. They thundered into the ranch yard, dismounting before their horses had fully stopped. Jacob and his men maintained a steady barrage, keeping Thornton's men pinned down in the rocky outcroppings. "Get inside!" Jacob shouted. "We can hold them here." Nathaniel and Margaret ran for the ranch house, the precious bundle of documents clutched tight in Margaret's arms. Behind them, the sound of gunfire continued. But they'd made it. They had the evidence. Now, they just had to survive long enough to use it. The dawn broke grey and cold over the Crossed Arrow Ranch, revealing the true extent of their situation. Thornton's men, at least a dozen now, had taken positions in the rocks and hills surrounding the ranch. They weren't attacking, just waiting, knowing that time was on their side. Inside the ranch house, Nathaniel, Margaret, Jacob, and 4 ranch hands assessed their situation over strong coffee and cold reality. "We can hold out maybe 3 days, Jacob said, checking their ammunition stores. "Food and water we got plenty, but bullets don't last forever when you're outnumbered." Margaret sat at the table, Thomas's bundle of documents spread before her. She'd spent the past hour organizing them, and her hands trembled as she catalogued the evidence her brother had died to preserve. "It's all here," she said, her voice awed. "Every case, signed confessions from intimidated homesteaders, copies of fraudulent surveys, correspondence between Judge Blackwell and Thornton planning their schemes. Thomas even has bank records showing payoffs to territorial land commissioners." "Is it enough?" Nathaniel asked. "Enough to bring federal charges?" "It's enough to bring down the entire corrupt network," Margaret said firmly. "Railroad executives, territorial officials, everyone involved, but only if we can get it to someone who'll act on it." "Young Billy made it to Copper Ridge yesterday," Jacob reported. "Got your message sent to the federal marshal in Cheyenne. Question is whether he'll believe it enough to come investigate, and whether he'll get here before those men outside decide to rush us." Nathaniel moved to the window, studying the siege lines. "They're smart, not attacking outright because that would draw attention from neighboring ranches. They're hoping we'll either run out of supplies or make a desperate break for it. Or that they can starve us into surrender," one of the hands, a young man named Samuel, suggested nervously. "They can try," Nathaniel said, "but this ranch has weathered worse than Marcus Thornton." A white flag appeared on the hillside. Someone wanted to parley. "Could be a trap," Jacob warned. "Could be," Nathaniel agreed, "but we need to know what they're thinking." He grabbed his rifle. "Cover me from the windows. If shooting starts, get Margaret to the root cellar." "Nathaniel," Margaret started to protest. "Please," he said, meeting her eyes. "You're the only one who fully understands those documents. You survive no matter what." He walked out onto the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. A man approached under the white flag. Not Thornton himself, but Crawford, the territorial land office representative from the previous day. They met in the open ground between the ranch and the siege line, both men wary, both knowing this conversation could turn deadly in seconds. "Cross," Crawford said, "you know how this ends. You're outnumbered, outgunned. Thornton's got more men coming from Cheyenne. By tomorrow there'll be 30 rifles aimed at this ranch. Then you'd better be prepared for a bloody fight," Nathaniel replied calmly, "because I'm not surrendering." "We don't want bloodshed," Crawford said. "Just give us the woman and whatever she took from Black Rock Station. You walk away clean, no charges, no consequences." "You mean I walk away while you murder Margaret Holloway and destroy evidence of your crimes?" Nathaniel shook his head. "I don't think so." Crawford's expression hardened. "You're throwing away everything for a woman you met 2 days ago. She's nothing to you. Why die for her?" "Because," Nathaniel said quietly, "I spent the first 25 years of my life being told I was nothing, that I didn't matter, that powerful men could do whatever they wanted to me and I had no recourse." He met Crawford's eyes steadily. "I won't watch that happen to someone else. Not while I'm breathing." "Noble sentiments," Crawford said mockingly. "But nobility doesn't stop bullets." "No," Nathaniel agreed, "but walls do, and determination, and the fact that every rancher within 20 miles will have heard those gunshots last night and will be wondering what's happening here." Crawford shifted uncomfortably. That was clearly a concern they hadn't fully considered. "You have until sunset," Crawford said. "After that we're coming in, whether you fight or not, and if we have to take this ranch by force, nobody inside walks away." "Then I guess we'll see you at sunset," Nathaniel said. He walked back to the ranch house, feeling the weight of rifle sights on his back with every step. Behind him, Crawford retreated to the siege lines, and Nathaniel knew the temporary truce was over. Inside, Margaret had been watching through the window. "What did he say?" "The usual," Nathaniel replied. "Threats, promises, attempts to separate us. They've given us until sunset to surrender." "We can't hold out that long," Samuel said nervously. "Not against 30 men." "Then we need help," Nathaniel said. He turned to Jacob. "Send riders out, 3 different directions. Tell them to use the back trails, stay off main roads. Get messages to Garrett in Denver, to Marshal Williams in Cheyenne, to Judge Morrison in Laramie. He's honest, even if most aren't." "That'll split our forces," Jacob warned. "We'll be down to 4 guns defending this place." "Can't be helped," Nathaniel said. "The evidence has to get out even if we don't survive to see justice done." Margaret stood abruptly. "No." Everyone turned to look at her. "No," she repeated, her voice stronger. "I won't let more people die for this. I should leave. Draw them away from the ranch." "They'll kill you the moment you're in the open," Nathaniel said. "Then at least you'll all survive," Margaret argued. "You've done enough. More than enough." "This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I read that letter," Nathaniel interrupted. "And I don't abandon people who trust me. We see this through together." "Listen to the boss, miss," Jacob said. "We all knew what we signed on for when we came to work for a black rancher in hostile territory. Standing up to powerful men who think they own everything. That's just another Tuesday around here." Despite the tension, Margaret felt tears prick her eyes at the loyalty these men showed, not just to Nathaniel, but now to her as well. "Then we fight," she said. "But smart. We need to buy time for help to arrive." She spread the documents on the table again, this time looking at them with a strategist's eye. "Thornton and his people think we only have Thomas's summary letter. They don't know we recovered the actual evidence. What if we used that?" "How?" Nathaniel asked. "We let them think we're willing to negotiate," Margaret said. "Offer to exchange the documents for safe passage. But we give them copies, convincing copies that will take time to verify as fake. Time we use to get the real evidence to federal authorities." Jacob nodded slowly. "Could work, but making convincing copies, I can do it," Margaret said. "Thomas taught me drafting and document work when we were young. It's how he first got interested in surveying. Give me 4 hours and decent paper. I can create copies that will fool them long enough." 4 hours is almost noon, Nathaniel calculated. That leaves 6 hours until their sunset deadline. "Then we'd better get started," Margaret said, already gathering materials. The next 4 hours passed in tense concentration. Margaret worked at the dining table, carefully recreating key documents with just enough errors to eventually be recognized as forgeries, but convincing enough to pass initial inspection. The men took turns on watch, monitoring the siege lines, preparing defenses. Around mid-morning, a rider approached from the north, not one of Thornton's men, but a neighboring rancher named Hoskins. He was allowed through the siege line after a brief conversation with Crawford. "Cross," Hoskins called as he dismounted. "What in blazes is going on here? My hands heard gunfire last night, and now there's armed men surrounding your property." Nathaniel met him at the porch. Hoskins had never been particularly friendly. He'd made no secret of his belief that black men shouldn't own property, but he was honest and believed in rule of law. "Long story," Nathaniel said. "Short version. I'm harboring a witness to territorial corruption, and powerful men want her silenced." Hoskins's eyes narrowed. "What kind of corruption?" "Railroad land fraud, forged deeds, judicial bribery, murder." Nathaniel listed them off calmly. "We have documentation that would bring down half the territorial government." That's serious accusations, Cross. "It's serious crimes, Hoskins, and those men out there aren't here to arrest anyone. They're here to destroy evidence and kill witnesses." Hoskins looked toward the siege lines, his expression troubled. "Even if what you say is true, you're outnumbered. You can't win this fight." "Maybe not," Nathaniel admitted, "but I can make it costly enough that other people start asking questions. Why did Marcus Thornton need 36 gunmen to surround a ranch? Why was a territorial land office representative involved? Questions that lead to investigations." Hoskins was silent for a moment. "You're asking me to get involved." "I'm asking you to remember that the law is supposed to mean something," Nathaniel said. "That property rights and justice aren't just for wealthy white men. If they can do this to me, to Miss Holloway, they can do it to anyone." I'll think about it," Hoskins said, clearly uncomfortable. He remounted and rode back through the siege line, but Nathaniel noticed he stopped to have a long conversation with Crawford before leaving. "Think he'll help?" Jacob asked. "Probably not," Nathaniel said honestly. "But maybe he'll spread the word. The more people who know something's happening here, the harder it is for Thornton to cover up whatever he does." By early afternoon, Margaret had completed her forgeries. They were good, very good. The documents looked legitimate, the handwriting matched Thomas's, the content was accurate enough to seem real. "These will fool them for maybe 12 hours, Margaret said. "Once they have experts examine them closely, they'll spot the discrepancies, but 12 hours might be enough." "Enough for what?" Samuel asked. "Enough for federal authorities to arrive," Nathaniel said, "if they're coming at all." As if in answer, a distant sound reached them, multiple horses approaching fast from the west. Everyone tensed, weapons ready, but then Jacob lowered his rifle with a laugh. "It's not more of Thornton's men," he said, pointing. "Look at the flag." Through his field glasses, Nathaniel could see riders approaching under a United States flag, federal marshals, with what looked like a full contingent of deputies. The siege line scrambled to react, but the marshals rode through them like they didn't exist, scattering Thornton's men with the authority of federal law. The lead marshal dismounted in the ranch yard, a weathered man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen everything. "I'm Marshal Robert Chambers from Cheyenne. Got an interesting telegraph yesterday claiming you had evidence of federal crimes. That true?" "It's true," Nathaniel said, relief flooding through him. "Come inside, Marshal. We have a lot to show you." As Chambers and his deputies entered the ranch house, Thornton's men began melting away into the hills. Without the cover of darkness and isolation, their position had become untenable. Margaret spread the real documents, not the forgeries, across the table, and Marshal Chambers' expression grew grimmer with each page he examined. This is explosive," he said finally. "If even half of this is verifiable, we're looking at RICO charges, conspiracy, fraud, and multiple counts of murder." "It's all verifiable," Margaret said. "My brother spent 2 years documenting every detail." "Your brother being Thomas Holloway, the surveyor who died at Black Canyon Gorge?" Chambers asked. At Margaret's nod, he continued. "Accidental death, according to the territorial coroner." "It was murder," Margaret said firmly, "and I can prove it." Then we'd better get you somewhere safe, Chambers said. Along with this evidence, Crawford, Thornton, Judge Blackwell, they'll all be taken into federal custody for questioning. This investigation is going to shake the territory to its foundations. As the marshals began securing the documents and taking statements, Nathaniel found himself standing on the porch beside Margaret, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, a sunset they'd almost not lived to see. "Your brother would be proud of you," Nathaniel said quietly. "He'd be proud of both of us," Margaret replied. "You risked everything for a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Nathaniel said. "You're someone who proved that justice matters more than safety. That's worth risking everything for." Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, this man who'd stood beside her when he had every reason to walk away. "What happens now?" "Now," Nathaniel said, "we testify. We make sure your brother's death wasn't for nothing. We tear down the corruption and rebuild something better." "And after?" Margaret asked softly. Nathaniel smiled. After we'll see." The crossed arrow could use someone who knows their way around documents and land surveys, and you could probably use a place to start over, away from memories. It wasn't a promise, not yet. It was simply a possibility, offered freely with no pressure or expectation, and sometimes, Margaret thought, possibilities were the most precious things in the world. As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, federal marshals worked inside the ranch house, beginning the long process of documenting evidence that would take down one of the most extensive corruption rings in territorial history. And outside, Nathaniel Cross and Margaret Holloway stood together, two people who'd found courage they didn't know they had, who'd discovered that standing for justice could cost everything but was worth the price. The letter Thomas Holloway had tried to burn had finally been read. The truth he'd died to protect had survived, and tomorrow, that truth would begin to set people free. 6 months later, Denver, Colorado. The federal courthouse in Denver was packed with spectators, journalists, and curious citizens who'd come to witness what newspapers were calling the trial of the decade. On trial were Marcus Thornton, Judge Harrison Blackwell, and 17 other defendants charged with conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, and murder. Nathaniel Cross sat in the gallery, watching as Margaret Holloway took the witness stand for the third day of testimony. She'd spent the past 6 months working with federal prosecutors, organizing her brother's evidence into a narrative of systematic corruption that had shocked even seasoned law enforcement. She looked different now, stronger, more confident. The fear that had haunted her eyes that night in Thomas's abandoned cabin had been replaced by steady determination. "Miss Holloway," the lead prosecutor said, "can you explain to the jury the significance of Exhibit 47? Margaret picked up the document, one of Thomas's carefully preserved land surveys. This survey was commissioned by the Territorial Land Office to assess water rights along Copper Creek. But if you look here," she pointed to specific markings, "the survey has been altered after submission. Property boundaries were shifted, giving the railroad access to water that legally belonged to homesteaders." "And who authorized these changes?" the prosecutor asked. "According to the correspondence we've recovered, Judge Blackwell ordered the alterations, working in coordination with Marcus Thornton." In the defendant's section, Blackwell's attorney objected, but the judge overruled him. The evidence was overwhelming, documented in Thomas Holloway's meticulous records, and corroborated by witnesses who'd finally found the courage to come forward. The trial lasted 3 weeks. When the verdicts finally came in, every defendant was found guilty on multiple counts. Thornton received 25 years in federal prison. Judge Blackwell, 30 years. Lesser participants received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. But more importantly, the investigation sparked by Thomas's evidence had rippled throughout the territory. Corrupt officials resigned. Railroad companies faced federal oversight. Land claims were reviewed, and numerous families had their property rights restored. Thomas Holloway's death had not been in vain. After the sentencing, Nathaniel waited outside the courthouse as Margaret finished speaking with prosecutors. When she finally emerged, the late afternoon sun caught her hair and she smiled, the first truly carefree smile he'd seen from her. "It's over," she said simply. "It is," Nathaniel agreed. "What now?" Margaret looked at the bustling Denver street, at the life she'd built here over the past months. She'd found work with a law firm specializing in land rights, putting her brother's training to good use, helping others fight the kind of corruption that had killed Thomas. "I could stay here," she said. "There's good work to be done in Denver." "You could," Nathaniel said. "Or," Margaret continued, turning to face him, "I could accept a certain rancher's offer to help manage land surveys and documentation for the Crossed Arrow Ranch. I hear Wyoming Territory is looking for competent surveyors who understand property law." Nathaniel's smile widened. That rancher would be grateful for the help. "Though I should warn you, ranch life isn't easy. Early mornings, hard work, and neighbors who still think a black man owning land is controversial enough, without adding a woman who brought down a territorial judge." "I've faced worse," Margaret said. "Besides, I like early mornings, and hard work, and controversial ranchers." They walked together through Denver's streets as the sun set, discussing practical plans. Margaret's move to Wyoming, the expansion of the Crossed Arrow, the advocacy work they could do together for homesteaders facing similar schemes. But beneath the practical talk was something deeper, something that had been growing since that night when Nathaniel had looked at a frightened woman clutching a burned letter and decided that some fights were worth everything. 2 months later, Crossed Arrow Ranch. Margaret stood on the porch of the ranch house watching the sun rise over land that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. In the valley below, cattle grazed peacefully. In the barn, hands were beginning their morning chores, and beside her, coffee cup in hand, stood Nathaniel. "You're thinking about Thomas," he said quietly. "Always," Margaret admitted, "but lately I'm thinking about what he'd say if he could see this. See how his work changed things. He'd probably say his little sister was tougher than he gave her credit for," Nathaniel suggested. Margaret laughed. "He always underestimated me, thought I needed protecting from the harsh realities of the world." She looked at Nathaniel. "But you never did. From that first night you treated me like a partner, not someone who needed coddling." "Because you didn't need coddling," Nathaniel said. "You needed someone to stand beside you, not in front of you." In the months since the trial, their partnership had deepened into something neither had expected, but both had come to treasure. Margaret had proven invaluable in managing the ranch's legal affairs, helping not just the Crossed Arrow, but neighboring spreads navigate the complex changes in territorial law that followed the corruption prosecutions. And Nathaniel had given her something she'd thought lost forever, a sense of home, of belonging, of having a place where she could be both strong and vulnerable without judgment. "There's something I want to show you," Nathaniel said, setting down his coffee. He led her to the barn where Jacob was saddling 2 horses. "Morning, Miss Margaret," Jacob said with a grin. "Boss says you're going on a ride." "Apparently," Margaret said, curious. They rode east into the hills, following trails Margaret had learned over the past months. Finally, they reached a high ridge that overlooked the entire ranch valley, a view that took Margaret's breath away. 600 acres beyond our current border," Nathaniel said, gesturing to the valley below. "Part of the land that was illegally seized and is now being redistributed to legitimate claimants. I'm thinking of filing a claim." "That would nearly double the size of the Crossed Arrow," Margaret said. "It would," Nathaniel agreed, "but it would also mean more work, more responsibility, more risk. I wouldn't want to take it on alone." He turned to face her, and Margaret saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. "I'm asking if you'd consider becoming a full partner in the Crossed Arrow Ranch," Nathaniel said. "Legal partner, documented in the territorial records. Your name alongside mine on every deed and document." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. In a time and place where women's property rights were limited and interracial partnerships were viewed with deep suspicion, what Nathaniel was offering was extraordinary. Not just business partnership, but a declaration that he saw her as an equal, that he trusted her completely. "I accept," she said. "But only if you understand that I'm going to reorganize your entire filing system because it's chaos and makes no sense." Nathaniel laughed, the sound carrying across the valley. "I wouldn't expect anything less." They stood together on that ridge, looking out over land that would be theirs to build on, to protect, to share. The journey that had begun with a burned letter and a desperate woman had led them here, to partnership, to possibility, to something that looked remarkably like home. 1 year later, the Crossed Arrow Ranch had become something of a legend in Wyoming territory. Run by Nathaniel Cross and Margaret Holloway, the rancher and the surveyor who'd brought down a corruption ring, it was now also known as a place where homesteaders could get honest legal advice and fair treatment. Margaret had established a small practice, helping families navigate land claims, often working without pay for those who couldn't afford lawyers. Nathaniel had expanded the ranch to encompass nearly 1,500 acres, building it into one of the territory's most respected operations. But more than that, they'd built something personal, a partnership that had deepened into love, though neither rushed to formalize it beyond their business arrangement. In a world quick to judge, quick to condemn relationships that crossed societal boundaries, they moved at their own pace, building a foundation of trust and respect that would outlast any ceremony. On the anniversary of the night Margaret had found the letter, they rode together to Thomas Holloway's grave. Margaret had arranged for him to be moved from the lonely canyon where he died to a proper cemetery in Cheyenne, with a headstone that read, Thomas William Holloway, 1843-1878. He stood for truth when silence was safer. Margaret laid wildflowers on the grave, then stood quietly, Nathaniel beside her. I did it, Thomas, she said softly. I finished what you started. Justice was served. The wind whispered through the cemetery grass, and for a moment, Margaret could almost hear her brother's voice responding, I never doubted you, Maggie. Not for a moment. As they rode back to the Crossed Arrow, the setting sun painted the Wyoming sky in brilliant colors, gold and crimson and purple, a canvas of possibility. Do you ever regret it? Margaret asked. Getting involved that night? Everything that came after? Nathaniel considered the question seriously. Not once. You? Never, Margaret said firmly, though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if you'd been the kind of man who turned away, who decided it wasn't your problem. Then you would have found another way, Nathaniel said confidently. You're too stubborn to have given up. I prefer to think of it as determined, Margaret said with a smile. Stubborn, Nathaniel repeated, grinning, but it's one of your better qualities. As they approached the ranch, they could see lights in the windows, smoke from the chimney, the signs of life and home. Jacob waved from the porch, and young Billy called a greeting from the barn. This, Margaret thought, was what Thomas had fought for, not just justice in the abstract, but the real tangible ability of people to build lives free from corruption and fear. The ability to own land honestly, to be treated fairly, to stand up to power without being destroyed. And she and Nathaniel were living proof that his fight had mattered. They dismounted in the yard, and Nathaniel took both horses' reins. I'll handle these. You go warm up. There's stew on the stove. Margaret started toward the house, then turned back. Nathaniel? Yes? Thank you for telling me to read that letter, for standing beside me, for everything. Nathaniel's expression softened. Thank you for trusting me with your truth, for being brave enough to finish what your brother started, for building this with me. As Margaret entered the warm house, she pulled the original letter from where she kept it in her desk, no longer charred fragments of paper, but a testament carefully preserved as evidence, and now returned to her after the trial. She unfolded it one more time, reading Thomas's words. If you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. But Margaret, you've always been stronger than you believed. Don't let them win. Don't let my death be for nothing. Find someone you can trust and see this through to the end. Justice matters, Maggie. It always matters. I did, Thomas, she whispered to the letter. I found someone I could trust, and we saw it through to the end, together. Outside, Nathaniel finished with the horses and stood for a moment, looking at his ranch, their ranch now. He thought about the journey from that night in the abandoned cabin to this moment of peace and prosperity. Sometimes, he reflected, the right choice wasn't the easy one. Standing up to power, risking everything for justice, opening yourself to partnership with someone the world said you shouldn't trust, none of it was easy. But all of it had been worth it. He walked toward the house, toward warmth and partnership and the life they were building together. And as he opened the door, Margaret looked up from the stove with a smile that felt like coming home. The letter they'd tried to burn had changed everything, and from its ashes had risen something neither of them could have imagined that desperate night, a future built on truth, courage, and the simple recognition that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Justice, partnership, home, and the quiet, revolutionary act of two people choosing to stand together against a world determined to keep them apart. If this story moved you, don't just hit that like button, hit that subscribe button too. At The Black Rancher, we're committed to uncovering the hidden histories that shaped America, the stories of courage that were deliberately erased because they challenged power and prejudice. These aren't just entertaining tales, these are the foundations of who we are as a nation, the proof that justice has always mattered, even when it cost everything. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Help us ensure that stories like Thomas and Margaret Holloway's, stories of ordinary people standing up to extraordinary corruption, are never forgotten again. Thank you for spending this hour with us, exploring a chapter of American history that deserves to be told. Thank you for caring about truth, about justice, about the real heroes who built this country against impossible odds. Drop a comment below and let me know, what moment in this story impacted you most? What other untold stories from the frontier would you like to hear? Until our trails cross again, remember, the most dangerous thing you can do to truth is try to burn it. Because somewhere someone will always be brave enough to read it anyway. This is The Black Rancher, reminding you that history belongs to everyone, not just those who wrote it.